Small intestine is another lecture about the GIT. The small intestine is the longest part of the alimentary canal and extends from the pylorus of the stomach to the ileocecal junction, where the junction between the large and the last part of the small intestine. We call it ileocecal junction. The greater part of the digestion and the food are taken here. Absorption takes place in the small intestine. It's divided into three parts: duodenum, jejunum, ileum. The objectives. We have to know during this series of slides about the parts of the small intestine, the blood supply of the intestine, how we differentiate it between the jejunum and ileum during our normal surgical life. Large intestine, we have to know about the large intestine and the parts of the large intestine and its blood supply. The nerve supply to both small and large intestine, mesentery and development of the small intestine and the large intestine. The duodenum is the first part of the small intestine. It's the first part and it's about 25 centimeters. This one is also widest and the most fixed part. The duodenum pursues a C shape, curves around the head of the pancreas. The duodenum begins at the pyloric on the right side and ends at the jejunal junction on the left side. This junction occurs approximately at the level of the L2 vertebra, 2 cm or 3 cm to the left of the midline. The junction usually takes the form of acute angle, the duodenojejunal flexure. Most of the duodenum is fixed by the peritoneum, except certain parts are mobile on the posterior. It's fixed to the posterior wall of the abdominal wall and considerable partial retroperitoneal organ. The duodenum is divisible into 4 parts. This figure shows you the position of the duodenum around the head of the pancreas, Superior part is the first part, short, approximately 5 cm in length, and lie anterolateral to the body of the L1 vertebra. Descending part is the second part, longer, it's about 7 to 10 centimeters, and descending along the right side of the L2 to L3. Horizontal part 6 to 8 centimeters long and cross the L3. The ascending part is the fourth part, about 5 centimeters, and begin at the level of the L3 vertebra, lumbar vertebra, and rises superior as far as the superior border of L2 vertebra. This is show you A, B, C, D, E parts of the esophagus, and the other parts, other figures show you the position of the duodenum around the head of the pancreas and its relation. The first 2 centimeters of the superior part of the duodenum, immediately distal to the pylorus, has mesentery and is mobile. This free part called the cup, duodenal cup, has an approximately distended from the remnants of the duodenum, where it's observed radiologically by using at contrast medium. The distal to 3 centimeters. So the first 2 centimeters of the superior part contain mesentery, has a mesentery, while the distal 3 centimeters of the superior part and the other 3 parts of the duodenum have no mesentery and are immobile, because they are retroperitoneal. The superior part of the ascent from the pyloric and is overlapped by the liver and the gallbladder. The peritoneal covering its anterior aspect part is bare on the peritoneum posteriorly, except of the ampulla. The proximal part has the hepatoduodenal ligament from the lesser omentum attached superiorly and the greater omentum attached inferiorly. This figure shows you the shape and the rookies of the stomach and the cup of the duodenum. Descending parts of the duodenum run inferiorly, curved around the head of the pancreas. Initially, it lies to the right of the height and parallel to the inferior vena cava. The bile and the main pancreatic ducts enter the second part from its posteromedial wall. These ducts usually united to form the hepatopancreatic ampulla, which is open on the area called the major duodenary papillae, located at the posteromedial surface of the descending colon. The descending part of the duodenum is entirely retroperitoneal, covered by peritoneum. The anterior surface of its proximal and distal third is covered by the peritoneum. The peritoneum reflected from the middle third to form the double layer of mesentery of the transverse column, transverse mesocolon. We call the transverse mesocolon. The inferior or the horizontal part of the duodenum is part of the duodenum, run transversely to the left lumbar over the left side of the midline. It passes over the inferior vena cava, aorta, and the left lumbar vertebra. It crossed by the superior mesenteric artery and vein and the root of the mesenteric of the jejunum and ileum. The inferior horizontal part, the superior, is also run superior to the head of the pancreas and uncinate process. The anterior surface of the horizontal part is covered with a peritoneal, except the region where it is crossed by the superior mesenteric vessel. The root of the middle of the superior mesenteric artery has no peritoneum. Posteriorly is separated from the vertebral column, the horizontal part. The right cross, the right south major, inferior vena cava, aorta, right testicular or ovarian artery. The ascending part of the duodenum is run superiorly and along the left side of the aorta to reach the inferior border of the body of the pancreas, where it's curved interior to join the jejunum at the jejunal junction, supported by the attachment of the suspensory muscle ligamentous trees. The muscle is composed of a slip of skeletal muscle from the diaphragm and its fibromuscular band of the smooth muscle from the third and fourth part of the duodenum. Contraction of this muscle will widen the angle of the duodenum, so facilitate the movement of the food toward the small intestine, second part. The suspensory muscle, also the contraction, the suspensory muscle passing posterior to the pancreas and splenic vein anterior to the left renal vein. The artery of the duodenum arises from the celiac and the superior mesenteric. The celiac will give the gastroduodenal artery and its branch for a superior pancreatic or duodenal artery supplying the duodenum and proximal to the entry of the bile duct into the descending part of the duodenum. The inferior pancreatic or duodenal arteries branch of the superior mesenteric supply the duodenum distal to the entry of the bile ducts. As you know that the duodenum has in its embryonic origin formed by two parts. The pancreatic duodenal artery lie in the curve between the duodenum and the head of the pancreas and supply both these structures. The anastomosis of the superior and inferior pancreatic duodenal artery which occur approximately at the site at the level of entry of the bile junction and the descending mesentery and descending and horizontal parts of the duodenum. This formed by, as you know, this anastomosis is formed by celiac and superior mesenteric artery. Superior mesenteric artery is an important transmission of the blood supply to the digestive tract, which are formed by two parts, proximal and distal. The proximal extend toward the mouth to and including the abdominal part of the esophagus. The blood supply is by the alimentary blood supply the alimentary tract by the celiac. Distally, the extending abroad away from the mouth to the left colic flexure, the blood is supplied by superior mesenteric artery. This basis of this transmission of the blood to the embryological, it's the junction between the foregut and midgut. The venous and lymphatic drainage of the duodenum. The venous duodenum is follow the artery and drain into portal veins, some directly and other indirect through the superior mesenteric and splenic artery. From the superior and inferior pancreatic or duodenal artery and into the pyloric lymph node which lie along the gastroduodenal artery. The posterior lymphatic vessel passes posterior to the head of the pancreas and drained into superior mesenteric lymph node. The efferent lymphatic vessel from the duodenal lymph nodes drain into celiac lymph nodes. Now, the nerve supply of the duodenum derived from the vagus and the greater and lesser splenic nerves by way of the celiac and the superior mesenteric plexus, from which they are conveyed to the duodenum via the periarterial plexus extending to the pancreatic duodenal artery. Jejunum and ileum. The second part of the small intestine, the jejunum, begins at the jejunal flexure, where the alimentary tract resumes on intraperitoneal course, changing because the duodenum is retroperitoneal while the jejunum is intraperitoneal course. The third part of the small intestine, the ileum, ends at the ileocecal junction. The union of the terminal ileum and the cecum, which is the first part of the large intestine, called ileocecal junction. Together, the jejunum and ileum are about 6 to 7 meters in length. The jejunum constituting approximately for the 2/5 and of the whole length of the small intestine, and the ileum approximately 3/5 of the intraperitoneal section of the small intestine. Most of the jejunum lie the left upper quadrant of the infracolic compartment, while the most of the ileum lie in the right lower quadrant. The terminal ileum usually lie in the pelvis region, from which it ascends and ending in the medial aspect of the cecum. Although there is no clear line of demarcation between the jejunum and ileum, but there are a characteristic difference that are surgically important. We have to know them. This figure shows you the position of the ileum and the position of the jejunum. The mesentery is a fan-shaped fold of the peritoneum that attach to the jejunum and the ileum to the posterior abdominal. The root origin of the mesentery, approximately 15 centimeters in length, is directly obliquely, inferiorly, and to the right. It extends from the duodenal junction on the left side of the vertebral L2 to the ileocecal junction on the right sacroiliac junction. The average breadth of the mesentery from its root to the mesentery to the intestinal border is 20 centimeters. The root of the mesentery crosses successfully the ascending and the horizontal part of the duodenum, the abdominal aorta, inferior vena cava, right ureter, right serous major, right testicular or ovarian vessel. Between the two layers of the mesentery, the superior mesenteric vessels, lymph nodes, and a variable amount of the fat and the autonomic nerves are. Now, during this slides, the following slides, there are different features between the jejunum and ileum. The jejunum lie coiled in the upper part of the peritoneal cavity below the left side of the transverse mesocolon. The ileum is in the lower part of the cavity and in the pelvis. Second difference, the jejunum is wider, border, thicker, walled, and more red than the ileum. The jejunal wall feels thicker because of the permanent folding of the mucosa membrane. The plica circularis are larger, more numerous, and closely set in the jejunum, whereas in the upper part of the ileum they are smaller and more widely separated, and in the lower part they are absent. The jejunum mesentery is attached to the posterior abdominal wall above and to the left of the aorta, whereas the ileal mesentery is attached below and to the right of the aorta. The jejunal mesentery vessel from only one or two arcades with long and infrequent branches passing to the intestinal wall. The ileum receives numerous short terminal vessels that arise from the series of 3 or 4 or even more arcades. We will discuss in the pictures what the meaning of arcade. At the jejunal end, of the mesentery, the fat is deposited near the root and is scantly near the intestinal wall. At the ilial end, the mesentery, the end of the mesentery, the fat is deposited throughout all of the mesentery so that it extends from the root to the intestinal wall. This is the difference. This picture shows you the difference between the ileum and the jejunum. The numerous branches from 1 to 2 arcades, the jejunum, while numerous arcades in the ileum. The plica circularis is in the jejunal wall is thicker and numerous, while in the ileum is less and may be absent at the terminal part of the ileum. The superior mesenteric arteries supply the jejunum and ileum. The superior mesenteric artery usually arises from the abdominal aorta at the level of L1 vertebra, proximal 1 centimeter inferior to the celiac trunk between the layer of the mesentery, sending branches about 15 to 80 branches to the jejunum and ileum. The artery united to form a loop of arcades called arterial arcade, which give rise to a striated artery called vasa recti. Vasa recti mentioned in the figures. Superior mesenteric vein draining the jejunum and ileum, it lies anterior and to the right of the superior mesenteric artery in the root of the mesentery. Superior mesenteric vein and posterior to the neck of the pancreas, where it united with the splenic vein to form the portal vein. This is the fat distribution and the fat distribution in the ileum and in the jejunum. And another difference, lymphatic vessel. The specialized lymphatic vessel in the intestinal villi with a tiny projection of mucosal membrane that absorb fat are called lacteals. They empty their milk-like fluid into lymphatic plexus in the wall of the jejunum and the ileum. The lacti draining in turn into lymphatic vessel between the layer of the mesentery. Within the mesentery, the lymph vessel sequentially throughout the group of lymph nodes at the origin of the root of the mesentery may be present. Mesenteric lymph nodes scattered among the arterial arcade. Superior central node located along the proximal part of the superior mesenteric artery. Also, we have Peyer's patch. Peyer's patch is a collection of lymph nodes. Mainly see them in the ileal part. Peyer's patch. Thank you.